Thank you for that. Hard to follow up on two of America's leading strategists talking about how to steal government property, but we will do our best. I have the honor of introducing Stephanie Murphy, who served 3 terms as the U.S. representative for Florida's 7th Congressional District from 2017 to 2023. She was the first American Vietnamese woman elected to the House of Representatives, and she served as co-chair of the Blue Dog Coalition, chief deputy whip of the House Democratic Caucus, and on the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committees. And she also, beforehand, worked at the U.S. Department of Defense. And I think one thing that Kurt said about Ambassador Sinadinos, he talked about him being resourceful, effective, capable, and modest, and I think those are definitely the terms that I would use to describe the former Congresswoman who's about to give her keynote. So she will give a keynote, and then I will be able to put her on the hot seat about that keynote in a panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared, for the kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's just really an honor to be here today at this conference and to be in front of a really incredible group of participants. And I think the range and caliber of the participants at this conference really shows the strength of the ties that bind our nations and the shared values that we all work on together. You know, I'm a recovering politician, so you can invite one and not expect them to do a little self-promotion and tell a story about themselves. I'll give you a little hint. It is about fleeing, but not with contraband from Air Force One. But I want to tell this little story about myself because it underscores my belief in the power of the partnerships of nations like the United States and Australia. And I promise I'll try to tie it back to the issue at hand. But I'm the first Vietnamese American woman ever to serve in the United States Congress. But my journey to that role began a long way from Capitol Hill. In the late 1970s, my family fled communist Vietnam. My parents, who had worked closely with the US government as well as the South Vietnamese government, faced persecution when the North Vietnamese took over. And so they made this very courageous and brave decision to escape by boat with a 6-month-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. They joined thousands of what were referred to as boat people, all seeking freedom. And many of those people perished on their journey. And when our small boat ran out of fuel in the South China Sea, it was a US Navy ship that was in the area ensuring freedom of navigation and security at sea. It was that Navy ship that found our boat, and it gave us food, fuel, and water, allowing us to make it to a Malaysian refugee camp and eventually to a new life in America. But it was political courage during this crisis that really paved the way. Vice President Walter Mondale delivered this powerful speech at the United Nations. He urged nations to step up for these vulnerable refugees. In his words, he said, you know, history will never forgive us if we fail. History will never forget us if we succeed. And he inspired international cooperation, including from Australia. And all of these countries lifted their caps on the number of Southeast Asian refugees that they took. And this is the reason why you have a robust Vietnamese diaspora in Australia and a lot of really good Vietnamese restaurants here in Sydney. But it's also how my family and I found our way to the United States. It changed the trajectory of my life, and it's why I believe so strongly in the transformative power of international partnerships. You know, together, nations like ours can not only protect the vulnerable, but we can also foster stability, prosperity, and opportunity for everyone. And I think no partnerships are more integral to realizing that potential than America's alliances in Asia. And so moving on to talk a little bit about the importance of Asia and how Congress views it, you know, I don't have to remind you, Asia is home to over half the world's population, some of its fastest growing economies, and nations that are both trusted partners, but also nations that are strategic competitors. And Congress understands that what happens in Asia directly impacts the lives of Americans, from the products that are on our store shelves to the security of our borders and the preservation of our democratic values. However, sometimes, and especially of late, Congress's current focus on Asia is viewed through a soda straw. And on the other end of that soda straw is strategic competition with China. And this perspective, I think, is reflected in the fact that Congress set up a bipartisan select committee on the strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Really, really long title, but I think they wanted to do a little bit of messaging in that. And I think the fact that Congress set up a select specific committee tells you the importance with which they view the strategic competition. And while I wasn't on this committee, my observation is that the committee's mission was to try to bring Democrats and Republicans together to develop policies that protect American interests while also upholding our principles and kind of bring multidisciplinary policies together in one spot. And so this committee has already delivered on a number of legislation that bolsters defenses against intellectual property theft, legislation that reduces reliance on China for critical minerals, by fostering domestic production and international partnerships, and legislation that safeguards our technology and infrastructure from strategic competitors by reviewing foreign investments in sensitive sectors. So while there have been bipartisan achievements, I think we have to really remain vigilant that the US Congress doesn't engage in sort of groupthink. This committee and the congressional discussions that are taking place around China competition, they're taking place within the context of a political dynamic. And the political dynamic is that Republicans are trying to out-hawk each other on China. And there's a bit of a wariness by Democrats of being painted as soft on China. So what that does is it sort of pushes everybody towards accepting anti-China legislation and sometimes the most extreme positions without really looking at the nuance of the consequences of that legislation. And I think that can be really dangerous when everybody's charging in one direction so hard without anybody willing to put some brakes or inject reality into a debate. And, you know, these debates don't happen in the US alone. I think America's allies in Asia are essential voices of reason for helping us navigate these challenges and have these conversations in our country. I think one of the key ways in which the United States engages with Asia is through our economic engagement. And while the first Trump administration withdrew from the TPP, the Biden administration has prioritized initiatives like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. And Congress has played a role in helping to shape and fund the priorities that are within IPEF, really trying to promote fair trade, combat corruption, and strengthen supply chains. But at times, as Secretary Campbell said, Congress has also been involved in tanking elements like progress on digital trade. But I do see Congress supporting and trying to move forward by advancing collaboration in digital trade and infrastructure with other key partners like Japan, South Korea, and India. So while the executive branch is often in the lead in this, it does require collaboration with and coordination with Congress as we do provide the authorities as well as the money to execute on these policies. And we provide the oversight. And I think it's a bit tragic that the word trade has become somewhat of a four-letter word in DC because it is such a key tool in our ability to engage economically and to achieve our foreign policy goals more broadly. Some proposed policies that we've already talked about this morning, such as blanket tariffs, potentially 60% tariffs on Chinese goods and 10% across-the-board tariffs suggested by the incoming President Trump, really could have the effect of disrupting supply chains, straining relationships with allies, and kicking off a global trade war. I think similarly, some of the ideas discussed to revoke China's permanent normal trade relations status or eliminate the de minimis thresholds under the guise of combating fentanyl from trafficked from China could really end up harming American consumers, small businesses, and trade partners without necessarily achieving their cited goals. So I think trade initiatives really require nuance and balance, and overly aggressive actions risk undermining our partnerships in Asia, where economic cooperation is just as important as strategic alignment is. And again, America's allies in Asia are indispensable economic partners for helping us navigate some of these challenges. And just moving on a bit to security, sometimes with Congress, I think it's better to pay less attention to what the 535 individuals say and rather focus on what the body together does. In Congress these days, it's a bit more like performative theater. So you may hear things that cause concern, but at the end of the day, those ideas have to be passed together and increasingly have to be passed in a bipartisan way given the narrow majorities. So I think Congress's approach to security in Asia has been to focus on strengthening alliances and building new partnerships. A great case in point is in 2021, Congress directed the creation of the Pacific Deterrence Initiative and then went on to fund it at a price tag of $2.2 billion, really trying to ask the executive branch to focus on closing the gaps in military gaps and to enhance alliances to deter China. This initiative supports joint exercises, defense technology sharing, expanded military cooperation with a number of countries. So it was an idea that came out of Congress and is funded by Congress and is being executed and is a key element of how the United States is engaging on a security basis here in the Pacific. Congress has also supported deepened defense cooperation with Japan and South Korea, and obviously with through the AUKUS partnership with Australia and the United Kingdom, and that has received overwhelming bipartisan support. I think our relationship with India has also been further developed through the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, and that helps to facilitate joint research and co-development of defense capabilities. And I think you have seen Congress, on the whole, really express unwavering support for Taiwan. Through the Taiwan Relations Act and recent arms sales, Congress continues to back Taiwan's ability to defend herself. And so I think that's critically important. And again, addressing security challenges, just like economic challenges, doesn't happen in a black box in Washington. America's allies in Asia are critical security partners for navigating these challenges. So having looked a little bit at the challenges and the things that we have done and opportunities, I want to talk a little bit about some of the internal challenges to governance that make it hard for us to actually execute on these ideas. The political dysfunction in Washington really threatens to undermine our ability to execute on a cohesive Asia strategy. I think too often our discussions about strategic competition with China happen in closed doors in classified settings. But when you look at the way Beijing approaches this, they are pursuing their strategy in boardrooms and in the public domain. And so we really have to kind of rethink how we bring all the elements of government together on this challenge. And then the U.S. has recently really leaned into some tools like industrial policy and trade to compete. But agencies like Commerce and Treasury are still adapting to their new role as a player in national security. And so there's some I would say, learning challenges and coordinating challenges that come with that. And then Congress's oversight of these committees also faces some of the same challenges, as we have a little bit of a less developed focus in some of those committees than we would in, say, armed services or in our intel committees. And so it's just a challenge to try to get everybody up to speed, see the world in the same way, and figure out what tools they have in their toolbox to come at that challenge. And then one issue that Secretary Campbell touched on is, there are budgetary pressures that are really making it hard to execute on this. While defense authorizations, which is basically the bill that tells us what we can do, tend to move forward every year, the funding for defense development and diplomacy gets caught up in a broader fight over what the United States should be spending money on. And particularly, the development and diplomacy pillars are under a lot of pressure. The House budget, as Secretary Campbell mentioned, does have a proposed 50% cut for diplomacy and development, and that will significantly hinder our ability to bring, all of our toolkit to bear on these issues abroad. I think one of the reasons why this is the case is in order for us to be able to continue to fund our efforts, our foreign policy in the robust manner that is necessary, it takes members of Congress being able to articulate to the American people and to their constituency the importance of foreign engagement at a time when many in America are weary of American engagement overseas. And so it takes if you do, my organization does some polling on this issue, and the initial polling shows that 2-to-1 Americans would prefer to focus on domestic issues rather than foreign policy issues. But if you ask the question in a bit more nuanced way, articulating the challenges that exist out there, voters are willing to support U.S. foreign policy, U.S. military engagement overseas when they understand it in the context of the influence of other countries. So I think there's a lot of work that members of Congress have to do to educate the American public and to lead as opposed to leading from having their constituencies lead them. And then the final thing is that we have seen in recent years that, Congress is having a hard time doing basic functions, things like approving the confirming ambassadors or approving the promotion of our military leaders as they get caught up in domestic issues. And those things can really inhibit our ability to demonstrate leadership abroad. So lots of opportunities, but also some domestic challenges that create obstacles for us. But just in summary, I would just say that, I think Congress does see Asia not just as a theater for competition, but a region for extraordinary potential and promise. We just have, I think, underscoring different elements of that. I think for me, after, some 20 years after the United States and Australia and other countries gave Vietnamese refugees like me a second chance, I did find myself working at the Department of Defense on U.S.-Australian military relations at a time when yet another a community of nations were trying to provide assistance to Indonesia in the aftermath of the 2004 tsunami. And it really was a full circle moment for me. I believe it's a testament to what can be achieved when democratic nations work together and try to advance our shared values. And our efforts today are about more than addressing challenges. They are about building a future rooted in mutual respect and shared prosperity. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to work together on those things. And in the panel, I look forward to getting into each of how functional this Congress will be as a partner in that with you all. But I do think that together we can ensure Asia and the rest of the world thrives in the decades to come. And I believe that conferences like this one really provide the platform for the kind of dialogue among allies and partners that allows us to create a greater understanding and move towards these shared goals. And thank you.